A very good day to you, wherever and whenever you may be watching this video. I say wherever because I'm aware that we have people from Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, United States, Canada, and possibly other places watching these weekly videos during this time of lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome. And we begin our service today with some words by the Reverend Dr. Anne Peart. So if we just join together in a short period of prayer. As we gather today, we give thanks for our many blessings. Too often we are less than we would wish to be. We seek to forgive and to be forgiven for our failings. And we pray for strength to meet our difficulties. Too often our world seems unfair. May we have the courage and the endurance to work for justice and for peace. For it is in our strivings for others that we find ourselves. It is in our struggles for principles that we find peace. Amen. And the reading I have chosen for today's service was written by one of my predecessors from my former congregation at Nottage Chapel in the Swansea Valley before I received the call to Nottage. And it's entitled, Be Not Afraid of Fear, by the Reverend Dr. D. Elwyn Davis. Be not afraid, for fear brings more fear on itself. And it may be that what we feared at the start was nothing to be feared at all. And all the fear and the pain it gave was all in vain. Look at the fear when it comes to us as a hidden gift from God. A little warning on the dashboard of one's life that tells us to be wary as we drive along life's road. And not to take tomorrow's bend for granted, but in faith and with respect. Be not afraid of fear when it comes, for it may be another blessing in disguise. To make us humble when we have grown too big for our boots and think we can rule the world and God. Fear, though, is not always an illusion to be scoffed at and taken lightly. And even when the worst of fears are sometimes confirmed, true love that brings true faith and hope will cast all fear from itself and from the kingdom that it rules. So let that love guard closely your mind and heart, and be not afraid. The words there of the Reverend Dr. D. Elwyn Davis. And now we join together in a period of prayer and meditation. We have joined together to share with each other the divine peace, to discover our oneness with each other and with God. May there be trust between us and a willingness to be open. May there be love between us, a true caring and a true respect. From the troubles and concerns of the world, we turn aside for this time together. From journeying the desert path, we pause to share the life-giving waters. From the fountain of the Spirit, we drink to quench our heart's thirst. Let us remember with thoughts of love all the peoples of the earth. Let us never forget that in drawing closer to our brothers and sisters, we draw closer to the divine, the source of all life. Let us be free from social wrong, free from individual oppression and contempt, pure of heart and deed, despising none, defrauding none, giving to all the honour they deserve, whatever their colour, their race, or their creed. For this moment, as we join together in quiet, thoughtful reflection, let us remember that there are other men and women in other lands who are yearning and longing for the same things as us. Yearning for peace and longing for justice. Scripture says there is a time for silence and a time for speech. Rarely do we heed this advice. Let us then learn the silence of humility, the silence of wisdom, the silence of love, the silence of faith, the silence that speaks without words. Let us learn to listen to the silence of our hearts, that we may listen to the gentle movement of the Spirit within us. In returning from the silence, universal Spirit of love and peace, enter into all we say and all we do, shape our thoughts and our desires. I'm now going to pray the words of the Lord's Prayer, and I invite you to join me in saying the words out loud if you so wish. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. We also hold in our thoughts and prayers this day all those who are ill or who have passed from this life, perhaps due to the virus, but in whatever circumstances. May they rest in peace and rise in glory. Now, I happened to read a newspaper article some months ago now that suggested that people in Britain are some of the most pessimistic and, generally speaking, miserable in the whole of Europe. Studies suggest that as a nation we are some of the most dissatisfied and unhappy people in the whole world even. This is despite us living in a country in which very few of us go without what we want, let alone what we need for our basic everyday lives. And yet, apparently, a family of 8 living in a hut in Djibouti with barely enough adequate crops and a meagre income to survive on are statistically more happy than somebody living in the United Kingdom. If this is accurate, then it should make us ashamed, because here we are living in one of the most affluent economies in the whole world, and yet we seem unable to count our blessings. One reason that is given for this dissatisfaction is that we live in a fast-paced, ever-changing society where new technologies mean that a growing number of us are struggling to keep up with it all. Personally, I can empathise with this. Get my words out, sorry. As it often seems to me that new technology, rather than being the benefit that it was envisaged to be, can often prove to be a burden for many people. So how do we drag ourselves out of this depressive state? Well, the experts suggest that we, despite having more complicated and stressful lives, can become happier and less pessimistic and more like that African farmer who remains optimistic about life despite eking out an existence by actively seeking to develop a positive mental attitude to life. Now, I think it's quite humbling that this simple outlook of simply concentrating on the positive aspects of life is all that separates us from a poor African farmer who seemingly counts his blessings. I don't know how many of you watching this video will have ever listened to BBC Radio Wales, but if you have, you will no doubt have come across the larger-than-life character that is Roy Noble. Now, Roy Noble uses his show very often to call on us to develop a PMA, a positive mental attitude, to help us through the many trials that we will inevitably face in life. It could be argued that people with a religious faith should understand better than most the need for having a positive mental attitude. And this is because every single one of the world's great faith traditions teaches the need to possess such positive attitudes as faith, hope, love, forgiveness, patience, and self-control. But although we know we should hold positive attitudes, it is still essential for us to be aware of the need to avoid the negative attitudes to life that hinder us from enjoying a positive mental attitude. The words of the 37th Psalm urge us to fret not when we are faced with the problems of life. This is especially sensible advice when you consider the literal translation of the word fret, which is to devour. Fretting can be described as the experience we have when we convince ourselves of how unfair life in general is to us. There are, of course, many things that cause us to fret and worry, but perhaps the two most common causes are perspective and pride. We fret because we have the wrong perspective on our experiences. But too often, we view things from the wrong perspective. We fret over things we believe we are denied, or over things that we believe are being imposed upon us. We often fret out of a misplaced sense of pride. This list isn't exhaustive, of course, but I'm sure you get the point. All this fretting can have a destructive effect on us. It becomes a habitual response to life. And little by little, it mars the beauty of our person and erodes the strength of our spirit. Whilst I was pondering on what I was going to say in today's address, I happened to read an essay by the late Reverend Dr. David Dole, in which he writes, "Over the entrance to the church at Versailles in France, reputedly the most beautiful church in the whole of Christendom, and dedicated to Mary Magdalene, is a carving of Jesus sitting on a throne with his arms wide open. Beneath the carving is the text, 'Come unto me, all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden light.'" Words from the 11th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. And he writes, "This powerful image of Jesus reminded me of my mentor, Charles Hugh Bartlett, who told me that there are only two ways to live, in faith or in fear. He clasped his arms tightly across his chest. To live in fear is to live self-protectively and hold the world at bay, and no one can get through to you. He then threw open his arms in a gesture exactly like that of the carving of Jesus in Versailles. To live in faith or in trust, however, is to make yourself vulnerable. Life can hit you in the face, but it also means that life can come to embrace you." He continues, "Fear is a teacher and a friend, a natural reaction to perceived threat. Our real enemy is not so much fear itself as panic, the escalating fear of fear. Panic arises when we are unable to sit with fear as a friend, but project it onto the world, onto people, and onto things around us, and onto events we participate in the future." In her book, Start Where You Are, the Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes, "Usually we think that brave people have no fear. The truth is, they are intimate with fear." She goes on to say that getting to know and becoming familiar with fear may become a complete undoing of old ways of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and thinking. Often, our fears manifest themselves as anxiety about being in the wrong about making mistakes, and about appearing foolish. Whatever it is our fear hooks onto, so that we claim that we are afraid of this or of that, these fears are projections of a basic fear of losing ourself. We do not easily acknowledge the wisdom of the words of Jesus, that those who lose their selves will find their true selves. Or share the vision of the Buddha, that our sense of self stands constantly in the way of our enlightenment. So, this coming week, let us remember the words of the psalmist, and fear not, and fret not. And let us ponder Elwyn Davis's words, and consider the view that fear itself brings more fear. Maybe then we can develop a true positive mental attitude. And like the farmer in Djibouti, count our blessings one by one. Thank you for listening, and Amen. Well, as I've said for the last 5 weeks, we don't know when we will meet again in person, but I hope it won't be too long. Of course, we have to be mindful of not creating a worse situation than we currently have, especially as things seem to now be getting better. But should anybody need any pastoral care or any practical assistance, please contact me via the Facebook page or via nottage.minister@gmail.com. And we bring our service to a close with some words by the Reverend Elizabeth Birtles. May we be touched, fired, and inspired by the God-filled moments in our lives. May we know the blessing of being at one with all that is. And may this blessing be with us and with all people, now and always. Amen.